So this is the 9th town hall meeting. We've got one more next week, and then the referendum coming up on the 19th. So tonight we're going to go over some of the more frequently asked questions that we've received about the referendum process and the city's infrastructure. Then we'll provide an overview of the various projects that are included in the referendum. After that, we'll move into a financial discussion with our finance director on why we feel that debt makes sense for Newark. And we'll review the available funding sources and our current and proposed debt service obligations. And then we'll finish up with question and answer at the end. So it's kind of a long presentation. It's gotten longer, I think, each time we have one of these because we add some information based on feedback that we've gotten. So if you could hold your questions to the end, I'd appreciate it. So tonight you'll hear from myself, Tom Coleman, Dave Del Grande, our finance director, Tim Pulaski, our acting public works director, and Joe Spadafino, our parks and recreation director. So I figured it'd be best to start out with the most basic question, and that's why are we proposing a referendum? The short version is we have a large number of infrastructure projects that need to be completed and not enough cash to pay for them right now. So that's why we would like to use debt. The city's charter outlines our power to incur debt, and more specifically, it covers the exact steps that we have to follow in order to do so. So here in Newark, outside of a few very specific items, if we want to borrow money, it requires a referendum. So now it's important to point out that the referendum doesn't approve the projects themselves. All it does is authorize City Council to borrow money. So all of these individual projects that we're going to discuss tonight will have to come back to Council and be approved on their own merits, and then Council will approve the project and approve the financing at that time. So as you'll see, as we move through the presentation, we're proposing 4 questions, and 2 of the questions have multiple projects in the question. So if you have an issue with one individual project, in theory, you could still vote yes for the question and then direct your council person, inform them that while I voted yes, I have a problem with this one. I don't think you should do that one. So that's how this one's gone. So historically, the city has used debt only a handful of times. Most recently for the referendum and upgrades at our South Wellfield water treatment plant back in the early 2000s. Otherwise, we've paid for almost everything using cash. So what are the questions we'll be voting on? Compared to the last referendum, which had 2 questions, one for the referendum and one for South Wellfield, the questions this time are being handled differently. So while we have specific projects identified outside of Rodney, you're not going to be voting on them individually. They're bundled together based on each funding source, and that's a requirement of our charter, with the exception of Rodney, which is being pulled out on its own because that's how we've discussed doing that project from the beginning. So I'm going to go into a brief summary of the projects and financing now, but we're going to go into a lot more detail on the projects and financing later. So questions 1 and 2 are both for the Rodney project. Question 1 covers the purchase of the land, demolition of the existing structures, the environmental remediation of the site, construction of the pond, and construction of a multi-use path connecting Dallam Road to the underpass. And then also the trail from the Dickinson parcel to the underpass in like the Oakland's Pool area. So question 2 includes all the park amenities like the walking paths, pavilions, fishing pier, educational components like an outdoor classroom, and educational playground equipment. Both questions 1 and 2 will be financed through the State Revolving Loan Fund, and we've already locked in an interest rate with them of 2%, assuming that the project continues on its current schedule. And that's over 20 years. So question 3 includes all our proposed water and sewer utility projects. Those are proposed to also be funded through the State Revolving Loan Fund. I haven't checked we haven't locked in the financing yet, but the most recent time I checked a couple weeks ago, the rates were still in that 2 to 3% range. They fluctuate, and then once your project is finished, you lock in the rate based off what it is you lock in the rate prior to the project starting, sorry. Question 4 covers all of our general fund projects and parking fund projects, and it will likely be financed through a bank loan or potentially general obligation bonds, but probably a bank loan. We'll get into that later. So when you go to vote, each question will have 2 choices, either for or against the bond certificate of indebtedness issue. Basically, this for means that you support taking on debt for that question. Against means you do not support taking on debt for that question, or authorizing council to take on debt for that question. So here's a copy of the sample ballot. So this is what you'll see when you step into the booth. You'll see we have 4 questions down the left side. And then each question, you vote one time, so you're either for or against for each question. So tonight, you're going to hear Dave and I refer to the term capital in reference to spending and budgeting, so I wanted to provide a definition. So our charter defines capital as any project or equipment, including any extension or addition thereto or thereof, having a life expectancy in excess of or to be financed over a period greater than 6 years or a value exceeding $20,000. It's a mouthful of a definition. So what are examples of capital for the city of Newark? For us, capital projects are usually things like what we have listed here, and that's infrastructure. The large majority of our capital spending is going to be on an item like this, mainly because they're very expensive, and like your car or your house, they need to be maintained or replaced periodically. So how much infrastructure do we have? A lot. I'm going to walk through each of our utilities and give you an overview so you have an idea of the scale. So we have the most water infrastructure by a large margin, and most of these items are quite expensive. For example, it costs us around $1.2 million to replace 1 mile of small diameter water main like what's in front of your house. And as you can see there, we have 140 miles of it in our distribution system. So that's just after the water treatment plant. We also have pipe that's on the untreated side. The total replacement value of our water infrastructure is estimated to be around $200 million if we had to replace all of it today. That's almost $6,000 worth of water infrastructure for every resident in Newark, and that's just for water. We also have a lot of sewer infrastructure. The total replacement value for sewer is going to be less than water because it can be more easily rehabilitated, oftentimes without digging up the street. But even then, the replacement value is still more than $67 million, and that's assuming that we're not digging any of it up. Sewer, if you do have to dig it up, is a lot more expensive than water because it can get very deep. So water mains might be 3.5 to 5 feet deep generally. Sewer mains are anywhere from 5 to 25 feet deep. So if you have to dig one up, it makes a large hole and it gets very expensive. So stormwater is even more than sewer at around $100 million. And stormwater is somewhat unique in that we have different pipe materials with dramatically different life expectancies, to the point that we track them totally separate. Right now, we're only really concerned about one type, and that's corrugated metal pipe. We refer to it as CMP. And CMP lasts about 35 to 40 years on average, and we have about 5 miles of it in Newark. This is the pipe of most concern to us because almost all 5 miles are at or beyond its expected life. In addition to the pipes, we have 65 city-maintained stormwater ponds and facilities, mostly in residential neighborhoods. So our electric infrastructure is made up of substations, lines, transformers, and our McKee solar facility off Cleveland Avenue. We estimate the replacement value of the electric utilities infrastructure at $50 million or more. So in addition to our traditional utilities, we also have parking infrastructure like our downtown parking lots and parking meters. And they're handled through our parking fund, which is handled very similar to a traditional utility. So the money that comes in from the parking fund is segregated in a separate account, and then at the end of the year, we make a margin transfer. So we take a profit off the top of that parking fund. Generally, in our traditional utilities, it's around 20% that we take as profit that then goes towards the tax base. Lastly, we have our general fund infrastructure, like our city-maintained streets, City Hall, the police station, our parks, and other city-maintained facilities. This is the infrastructure that's supported directly by your taxes and fees, and those margin transfers from the utilities. In total, we estimate the current replacement value of our infrastructure and capital assets at around $500 million, which is a huge number when you think about the fact that we only have 33,000 residents. This means we have over $15,000 worth of infrastructure for every resident in the city. The vast majority of it's underground, or at least out of sight and out of mind, so it's easy to forget about until you hit a pothole with your car or your toilet won't flush or the lights go out. Now, while it's helpful to know how much of everything we have, it's better to know what condition it's in so we can plan. So what's the condition of our infrastructure? I'm going to go through each type in the same order, and you'll see we have different levels of information for each. Starting with water, I'm going to focus first on water mains because they make up the majority of the water system's assets. So getting good condition assessment on water mains is difficult because they have to remain under pressure when they're in service. And because of that, you can't directly investigate the pipes on the inside very easily. So we've begun piloting some technologies that will let us indirectly measure the condition of the pipe from the outside. They're all new technologies. They're still relatively expensive, and they're not nobody's doing them widespread yet, but we have started doing some. In the meantime, we use a combination of our water main break history, water quality complaints, pipe age, pipe material, and industry guidelines to estimate the remaining service life and prioritize our replacement. As I'll show in the next few slides, a lot of our water mains are going to hit or exceed their expected lifespan and expire in the next few years. It's important to point out that when a pipe expires, it doesn't stop working, but I'll get into more information on that shortly. So this is what we like to refer to as the bathtub diagram, and it represents the general failure pattern for pipes. You often get a quick round of failures. Here we call it the burn-in phase, when any manufacturing defects fail early. And then for a really long time, you'll see a constant rate that's really low, maybe one a decade or one every 25 years. And then as the pipe gets older, you hit the wear out phase and break rate increases. Most often, main failures are due to corrosion. So the expected life varies depending on the material and the manufacturing methodology, which is an analog for age. So the longer the life of the material, the longer that constant failure rate phase in the middle. That's the sweet spot. And with water mains, generally, the older the main, the longer the life. So it's a little counterintuitive until very recently when we started using different technology for our installations. So our oldest mains, like Main Street, we've got a sample of it in the back, were very thick because they didn't have the manufacturing technology to maintain tight tolerances. And those pipes have an expected life of 100, 120 years or more, probably an inch of material. The mains that were installed in the middle of the 20th century, kind of 1930 until 2000s, have a much shorter service life. We could manufacture them to a tight tolerance. So they made the walls as thin as they needed to be to withstand the pressures for operating the system. So the life on them went as low as 55 years. Depending on installation, it could be as high as 100. Water mains that we've installed since 2016 should have a life of 100. Like I mentioned, we started using different technologies and encasing the pipe in polyethylene wrap, basically, to keep soil off it. And soil is one of the main issues with corrosion. So you can have aggressive soil and it eats the pipe up. So this slide gets into what I mentioned earlier about a pipe expiring. So the green line represents the cost to operate the existing pipe. Now assume that this chart goes off into the distance here, and year zero is over here by the wall, and you get through that constant rate phase, and here you're entering the burnout phase. So at a certain point, the cost to make the repairs to the pipe when it breaks, the frequency of those repairs, the inconvenience to our customers and businesses, the cost to deal with that gets higher than the cost to replace the pipe. Now when that happens, depends on a lot of things. So is this water main out in the middle of a field somewhere and it's really easy to dig up? Or is it under Main Street? Is it a 12-inch or is it a 6-inch? What customers are there? Is there a hospital or a nursing home on that pipe? So there are a lot of variables that go into determining where that break-even point is, but at a certain point, it's cheaper to replace it. So right now, we're working to develop an accurate estimate for the remaining service life for all of our 140 miles of distribution pipe, but that's going to take some time. So for the sake of this presentation, we've developed some maps using industry guidelines from the American Water Works Association, which is to assume a water main will last about 70 years on average. While we feel that based on the areas in the city where we're seeing failures, it's going to be generally accurate for Newark. Some will be better, some will be worse, but on average, it'll average out. So this is a map of our distribution system. So this is all the 140 miles of distribution system piping. Got a similar map over here on the easel if you want to look at it more closely later. You'll see most of our pipes downtown are in the red category, which is expired. And then we've got a kind of a cluster here that's orange, and that's within the next 5 years. Then there's some pipes down here along Elkton Road and out on Kirkwood Highway that are 5 to 10 years out. But then there's this huge wave of pipes that are coming within the next 15 years. And what those are all the post-World War II neighborhoods that were built all at one time. Those pipes are all going to expire right around the same time. Now, I mentioned this to someone earlier. Try not to focus so much on the individual street and more on the general scale. So, like this pipe on Main Street looks expired, but the thing's so thick, it'll probably last another 20, 30 years. That's why we weren't in a race to get it replaced before DelDOT came through to pave because we don't have a main break history on Main Street, and we feel that it will last at least as long to get us to the next paving. But some of these other pipes out here in the blue areas, out here in Windy Hills, we've already been in here replacing pipes. We've been in here replacing pipes. These ones that are kind of within the next 15 years, they are a problem. This street right here, Ferncliff in Windy Hills, had, I think, 19 main breaks in 20 years on a 1,400-foot long stretch of road. So, these people were pretty severely inconvenienced, and there's some other streets like that around town. So here's a chart that shows each of those categories and the total mileage and the percentage of our system that makes up. So today, only around 15 miles of our mains are expired, which is about 12% of our system. And looking through all the pipes in our system, 15 years from now, that number is going to be 74 miles, absent a continued or increased effort to replace water mains. That's 57% of our system. It'll be 59 miles, even if we hit our current target of replacing a mile each year. That's 42% of the system. And this doesn't count our raw water pipes that carry untreated water and are in a similar condition. So since we started this, a study has come out of Utah State University on this specific topic. And it shows that nationwide, the average percentage of pipes that's expired is 16%. So we're doing slightly better than the national average, but that's going to change pretty considerably in the next few years. So nationally, the percentage of expired pipes has doubled since 2012. So that's this wave coming through nationwide. And the break rate for cast iron pipe, which makes up a large portion of our system, has increased 46% in the last 6 years nationwide. So the pipes are starting to fail more frequently. So what does that mean for Newark? Well, it means we should plan for more water main breaks and interruptions in water service. Here we've charted the number of water main breaks each year going back to 1977, which is the first year that we have records. So there's a definite trend, which is going to accelerate as a larger percentage of our pipes move into the expired category. So each one of these breaks is generally accompanied by a service outage, occasionally a boil water order, which can last 24 to 48 hours. And these have a negative impact on our quality of life and, if near a business, on their revenue. So like I said earlier, the pipes don't stop working, they just stop working well. So moving on from water mains. So starting in 2011, the city began increasing our water rates and sewer rates from the artificial low levels that were in place prior to then. This allowed for a capital project initiative where we really started ramping up our capital maintenance efforts. While water mains make up the majority of our assets, our other facilities have a much shorter life, so they have to be replaced more often and maintained more often. Because of that, they punch above their weight from a budget perspective. We're replacing them every 20 years instead of every 70, 80 years. So we've been pretty busy over the last 7 years, and we've completed over $17 million in water capital fund projects. We have 2 water treatment plant projects that are currently underway or will be completed in the next 12 months. The first one we just wrapped up at South Wellfield Treatment Plant, and that was to convert our pH adjustment system to a lower maintenance system. This is the South Wellfield Water Treatment Plant. This is what was built with the second question on the referendum back in the early 2000s. So this is the iron and manganese removal system. So the second project is to convert from chlorine gas to a liquid, basically liquid bleach system for disinfection at our surface water treatment plant. We'll also be making some building envelope upgrades, new roof, new siding, windows, et cetera, because the building was built in the early 90s and everything needs to be replaced. So that will be under construction probably in the next month or so. That will start. On the sewer side, we've been working to inspect and develop a prioritization for our rehab work. So far, we've inspected around 15% of the system, and we've identified around $4 million in high priority repairs. We began making many of the repairs during 2017, and we have another project that's underway this summer right now. Since 2011, we've spent nearly $4 million on sewer capital projects, and we've rebuilt all of our sewer pump stations to modern standards. On the stormwater side, we've been focused on corrugated metal pipe, like I mentioned earlier. Starting in 2016, we completed a citywide condition assessment on all the known corrugated metal pipe in the city, and we prioritized repairs. In total, we identified $3.4 million in repairs that we'll need to complete over the next 10 years or so. As many of you may likely be aware, City Council approved a stormwater utility last year that became effective January 1st of this year. Because of that stormwater utility, we built into those rates enough funding to pay for the repairs that we need to do for corrugated metal pipe over at least the next 5 years. But the current rate will not cover the proposed Rodney project, however. And we'll get into the specifics of that later, but it would be about $1 on average to your average homeowner extra in the stormwater bill per month. For our road network, we have a full pavement management program where we complete an annual inspection of all the roads in the city. We rate them, and then we have those ratings run through an optimization program to develop what we feel is an optimal program. If we're to keep our current city-maintained roadways, so that's the key is city-maintained, it's not your Main Street, Delaware Avenue, Cleveland Avenue, those are maintained by the state, but all the neighborhoods and smaller streets that don't have a number on them, those are the city-maintained ones. If we're going to try and keep them at the current condition average citywide, we need to spend around $1.75 million a year on paving and pavement rehabilitation efforts every year moving into the future. That's a number we've only been able to hit one time since 2011, and we did come close in 2017, but we're not hitting that number. So our pavement conditions citywide are deteriorating. In addition to that, we have $1.5 million in parks capital maintenance that's scheduled to be completed over the next 5 years. So how do we get ourselves into this position? Well, using only cash limits our ability to tackle large projects because they crowd out smaller, less sexy replacement projects and preventative maintenance. It's a lot more exciting to have a new ribbon cutting than replacing an underground pipe that's worked well your entire life. Our water and sewer rates are also entirely consumption-based. So if you use 0 gallons one month, let's say you go to the beach and you leave for the whole month of July, you'll get a bill for $0 from the city. Now, we still had to send you that bill. We still had to have someone create the bill. We still had to have the pipe in the street that was there whether you used it or not. If you had a fire, the fire company could still use water to put your fire out. So those are all costs that we incur whether you're there using water or not. And we also run into a situation with weather. So a large portion of our, because we're consumption-based and fully consumption-based, if we have a really wet year like this year, we lose a lot of revenue. So over the last 3 years, our water and sewer sales have underperformed our budget estimates because of the weather largely by $3 million in 3 years. So that's a large amount. So we're working with our city council to adjust our rates to try and reduce the charge per gallon and institute a minimum charge to cover basic infrastructure maintenance. Now the biggest issue we're facing though is that we're entering the first round of the replacement era. So historically we have not had to pay for most of the infrastructure in our city because it was paid for by developers or the federal government or some combination of government match and city match. And we're now approaching the first replacement cycle for most of those assets. So our tax and rate structure has never had to pay for the stuff that we use to get water to your house or take sewer away from your house or electric to your house. And as these things wear out over the next 20 years, the demands on our revenue are going to accelerate. So in addition to that, a large majority of Newark's been developed in an unsustainable development pattern. That's suburban single-family homes. If you live in a single-family detached home, I can almost guarantee you're not paying enough to cover the infrastructure necessary to support your house based on our current utility rate structure and tax levels. For example, if you live in a house with a 100-foot wide lot, your taxes need to support, in addition to police and other general fund expenses like trash service, the paving and maintenance of at least 50 feet of street frontage, water mains, sewer mains, electric lines, etc. So using our current cost for water main replacement, 50 feet of water main costs over $11,000 to replace. Assuming 10% of your water bill goes towards infrastructure, which has been our average-ish over the last few years, it'll take over 300 years to pay off this short little section in front of your house, let alone all the infrastructure like water treatment plants and booster stations and water tanks and things that support that pipe in front of your house. So fortunately, we have locations like the downtown and our industrial users, so downtown like this building here, 58 East Main. Buildings like this, this one in particular, I ran the numbers on, will pay off the water main in front of that building every 2 to 3 years. So because we have buildings like this, they can offset the neighborhoods. We see a very similar pattern for taxes that we see for utility rates. So here's a map that we've developed that's still in development, it's not finished yet, that shows whether a property is paying enough in taxes to pay for the general fund services it gets. While it's not complete yet, the general idea and scope is not going to be significantly different once it is. So based on our preliminary estimates, all the parcels in red do not provide enough in tax revenue to cover the cost of providing them with general fund services. Some may come closer than others, but they don't cover their cost. Parcels that have a positive value are colored in yellow, green, or blue. So you can see it's most of the downtown, townhomes, Cherry Hill Manor, Madison Drive, places that you wouldn't expect. Those are the higher density development projects because they have less infrastructure to maintain because they're on smaller lots and things like that. So it's important to remember this because if we approve a new single family neighborhood like out here, one of these, we will become poorer as a community than if we had done nothing at all because we're taking on more liabilities than we're bringing in revenue. Now, I don't want you, if you live in a condominium or an apartment or a townhouse, to stop hanging out with your friends and live out in the suburbs. That's not the intent of this. The goal is, the first thing that we have to do, if we have an issue, we need to have an honest conversation. What are the challenges that we're facing? So this is a challenge, and now that we know what the issue is, we can make smarter development decisions moving forward. So I know this presentation's been a lot of doom and gloom, but it's not all bad news, and it's definitely not unique to Newark. Cities all across the nation are facing the same problem, whether they know it or not. Illinois, for example, just determined they need $21 billion to spend on infrastructure every year moving forward, when historically they've spent closer to $3 billion. When you consider the entire budget for the whole state is $38 billion, you can see what kind of lift adding $18 billion of additional infrastructure spending each year is going to be for them. They're not going to be able to do it. Fortunately for us, I think we're in a much better place than a lot of other places for several reasons. Firstly, since around 2011, like I mentioned earlier, there's been a real desire on council to start addressing this problem and get in front of it. That's reinforced by the fact that we're here tonight having this conversation. We're also relatively compact compared to our peers. Dover, for example, has 2.5 times the land area as Newark, but only 10% more people. So you can assume they have about 2.5 times the stuff to take care of, with not many more people to spread that across. We're also in the fortunate position of having the Star campus. So a lot of people don't know this, but when Chrysler was there, they bought their electric from Delmarva Power. They didn't buy it from the city of Newark. And then when Chrysler went away, we didn't have any tax revenue from that location anymore. So as the university develops that property, any building that's built by someone that's not the university, so say the new Comores building or the tower that's going up, all of those properties come back on the tax roll. And when Chrysler left, we got that electric service territory. So as they build those buildings and start using electric, they're going to be buying the electric from us. So that's revenue we've literally never had. We don't serve water to a large portion of it. We do serve to the corner near the train station. So we'll have new water sales there, and we'll have new sewer sales to the whole property. So this is all new revenue that we haven't had ever, or at least not in over a decade. And that's going to help us offset some of these costs as things come online, new sales. Or at least, maybe on the electric side, we can hold down our electric rates or maybe reduce our electric rates to offset rising water and sewer costs. Now, I'm glad everybody's sitting down because you may not already know this, but the university is planning to add 4,000 grad students over the next 5 years and up to 1,500 undergraduates over the next 10 years. So grad students are year-round young professional residents who live and work in Newark. So if we can give them somewhere to live downtown where they can walk or bike to class, we get most of the benefits. So we'll get the tax revenue, we'll get the utility sales without the costs, the impacts to the school system, the impacts on our traffic and the like. So if the university is going to add those students, they're going to add them. And if we don't give them somewhere to live here, they're going to live in Bear, they're going to live in Glasgow, and they're going to drive in. And then we'll get the traffic, but we won't get the tax revenue, we won't get the utility sales, we won't get any of the benefits, we'll just get the problems that come along with it. So every 1% that we add to the tax base is 1% of tax revenue that can go towards supporting infrastructure and offsetting inflationary costs that doesn't need to come from our current residents. So at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Tim, who's going to go over all the individual projects that are included in the referendum. Before he begins, I want to point out that all these projects are in our approved capital budget for the next 5 years, the 2018 to 2022 capital budget. And these budgets are on the city's website. So if you're going to write down a web address, do newarkde.gov/vote, and that's where we'll have all this information up. And this presentation will be there, and you can get to this information when you get home if you think of something afterwards. So now I'll hand it over to Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. As Tom said, I'm the Acting Director of Public Works and Water Resources here at the City of Newark. Tom is typically our Public Works Director, but since he's been the Acting City Manager, I've took over the role of Acting Director. So many of the projects that you're going to hear about tonight from me are ongoing projects or programs which you may have heard Tom or I discuss or bring contracts to council in previous years. Others are simply overdue rehabilitation or upgrades to facilities that provide our water and other services throughout the city. I'll give you a high-level overview, but please feel free to reach out to me after the presentation or through our website, or just call City Hall. I'm usually willing to talk if I'm not otherwise busy, but I'm happy to talk about any of these projects afterwards. We also have an email address specifically for questions about the city, and it's asknewark@newark.de.us. That'll come up on a later slide that Tom has, but I just want to make it clear that we're willing to talk about these projects if something comes up and you haven't had the opportunity to get your questions answered so far. So hopefully many of you have heard or seen our proposal for purchasing the former Rodney dorms and demolishing them to make way for stormwater management pond with park amenities. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for the city to acquire a piece of land well situated to help achieve stormwater quality and quantity improvements. The parcel sits at the top of a large drainage area where little to no stormwater controls exist throughout the entire drainage area. Managing stormwater near its source is a key benefit to downstream systems. The parcel is also situated in an area that lacks city-owned open space in a close proximity to our award-winning Main Street. So one of our consultants brought it to our attention when we went through the process to come up with the plans and concepts for the Rodney parcel, is that if you look at a map of all our parks and they put a dot on all our parks, they circled Main Street, but there was nothing directly on Main Street that was city-owned. So we took a look at that and said, this is another good opportunity to use this parcel as a park. And as you can see here, we have 6,000 residents that live within a 15-minute walk of this site, and then 20,000 residents, which is nearly 2/3 of our residents, live within a 10-minute bike ride of the site. So it's significant from a park perspective as well as a stormwater perspective. The combination of the pond and park would address all of these important issues, as well as serve as a showcase for our educational efforts to show residents and visitors how they can contribute to keeping our stormwater and ultimately our drinking water clean and safe. It is important to note that the concept plan for the pond and park features presented is the product of an extensive public process that included input and suggestions from many of our residents in a year-long effort in 2017. So this slide shows the general concept of the pond with very few amenities. It's simply the pond with the walking path or multi-use path that goes through the site to the underpass. So although the project vision was to develop the pond and park together as complementary to one another, we are able to break out the stormwater management needs from the aesthetically pleasing park amenities into two questions on the referendum. So a yes vote on Rodney question 1 will authorize council to borrow money from the state revolving loan fund, which Dave will talk about later, for the purchase of the property, the demolition and environmental remediation, the pond construction, and some minor amenities as I discussed. This will allow the site accessibility, and it will also maintain the current pedestrian pathway through the site. Minor landscaping and pond edge treatments would also be included, and the estimated cost associated with this question is $6.5 million. So you can see here that there are a few plantings and things. Essentially, that's for an edge treatment. That's where there's a bench. They call it a safety bench that would enable. It would not enable you to get into the deeper part of the pond without physically walking 10 to 20 feet out into the pond. It also gives a refuge for the native plantings give a refuge for the native birds, which help control the mosquito population, along with circulation pumps and things that keep the water moving, which mosquitoes do not like the moving water. So the question 2 on Rodney, so a yes vote on Rodney question 2, would authorize council to borrow money from the state revolving loan fund to fund the majority of the park amenities that were discussed and chosen as part of our public workshops in 2017. Residents who participated in this discussion agreed that passive recreation coupled with the small classroom space and picnic areas was the best fit for this space. An accessible fishing pier was included, but the pond, we don't anticipate the pond to be stocked. We anticipate the fish would show up like they do in any other pond, but we have had discussions with parks that if it becomes a destination, then we'll discuss putting fish in the pond. Extensive educational signage and elements will be integrated into the site to show residents and visitors the role stormwater management plays in our ecosystem and in our city. So part of our EPA mandated permit for water quality, it breaks it down into 6 different categories, and one of those categories, one of the most important categories is education. We were actually just audited by the EPA on Tuesday for our educational efforts. So we do go to schools, we go to all the community events, and we get to try to get the word out on how important keeping our stormwater clean, and it starts at your house, at your place of business, and anywhere within the city. As Dave Del Grande will discuss later, the funding for the park amenities through the revolving loan fund are locked at 2%, and the approval is awaiting our signature. Funding these upgrades in future years with another source of funding would cost more because of the low interest rate that we are afforded on this project. So on this first slide, it lists the projects contemplated for our water utility. Several of these projects, as Tom mentioned, are not every 100 years, but every 10 to 20 years, and tend to crowd out the smaller jobs or tend to be pushed out due to lack of available cash. I'll get into the individual projects in a little detail on why each one is important in maintaining our water utility. So the first project up is the Laird Tract well field restoration. It is a new project, but it involves old wells. So we anticipate this project would effectively double our drought resiliency and bring back some production that was furloughed when the reservoir came online. So all these wells are protected within the White Clay Creek State Park or their surrounding areas, which is essentially a wooded protected area. And it's part of a long-term solution to drawing our water from the most protected areas of the city. So the idea here is when these wells were, if anybody's been here long enough to remember, these wells were pumped directly into the system, and we used to have a lot of issues with taste and odor of the water here in Newark. So there was no actual treatment of the taste and odor. So when the reservoir came online, we shut these down and didn't have the need to use the wells. Now we're looking at an idea where we can use these wells to replenish the reservoir and continue to turn the water over in the reservoir so it keeps the reservoir fresh, and it keeps we're able to, essentially, if we take 4 million gallons out of the reservoir, we could put 2 million gallons back in, whereas today in a severe drought, if we take 4 million out of the reservoir, we're 4 million short. So this would essentially fill it back up. It's not quite, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it's not a complete draining of the reservoir. So luckily somebody came up with an acronym for this one, and it's SCADA. It's the Supervisory Control and Data Acquisition System. It sounds like a lot, but it essentially allows us to be in 2 places, 2 or more places at one time. We're able to monitor our system data, track real-time levels in production, and make changes remotely if necessary. So we have one person on, one water plant operator on at all times, and we have 2 water treatment plants and several pumping stations and 7 water tanks. So it's difficult for them to get to every one all the time. So if they're having an issue, they can call Tom, they can call myself, and they can call the water superintendent, and we can go online either on our computers, on our smartphones, and we can look at things remotely and make changes if necessary. The good thing about this is it actually shows what our system looks like and how things are running. The 2 red things here, they are pumps. That when we took this picture, they were actually not pumping, but one is typically pumping. So we have a tank here, and then one of these pumps it to a second tank. This is actually the Levier's tank up at the old DuPont site on Paper Mill Road, Milford Crossroads, and we can show, this. We know what level this tank is. We know the pressure. We know how much water is coming in and going out. So we're able to monitor all this remotely. So Tom discussed the South Wellfield treatment plant upgrades a little bit. So as many of you may be aware that the groundwater underneath of our South Wellfield treatment plant was recently listed on EPA's National Register, or more commonly known as a Superfund site. The good news about the Superfund site is that the EPA recognizes that it is an issue, and they're willing to spend the money that the state doesn't have to find the source and clean it up. And the good news, the other good news is that the contaminants actually found in the water are easily treatable by our current system. However, the current system is nearing the end of its useful life and needs to be replaced. We also have several wells that we cannot use because of the level of contaminants, because the capacity of the current system does not keep up. So we would upgrade the system to be able to bring those wells back online, and again increase our drought resiliency, because we don't have a limit on when we have to stop pulling water from the wells. We just have a limit on how much we can actually pull out, but that limit's in effect all the time, not just during droughts. Other modern upgrades are also being vetted for inclusion on this facility upgrade, including a new tank configuration and pumping system. There are a few, Tom mentioned a few pipes in the back there, that these are actually the same pipes that are in the back. This is an old pipe, and this is a new pipe. Obviously, this you can see as you get out here, we're almost to the outside. So if this gets to the outside, that pipe breaks, and there's water leaking out of the road. This is a cast iron pipe that was not lined with concrete. All of our new pipes are actually ductile iron pipes, and they're lined with concrete. So you don't get this corrosion on the inside, or you don't get the corrosion on the inside that we used to get. So that helps us have a longer life of these water mains. One practice that Tom mentions is we're wrapping the pipe in plastic now when we put it in the ground, so we eliminate that contact between the corrosive soil and the water main. So all these things, they're getting us back up above that 100-year lifespan on these pipes. You can also see on the slide that replacement requires a large road opening and road restoration, which are a majority of the cost of the installation. Actually, you can see the plastic liner in this. This is a relatively recent photo. So it should be noted that we do have better coordination with the annual paving program to try to replace and upgrade utilities prior to paving the streets. It does reduce costs on both projects. We have discussed a system-wide study, but as Tom said, a lot of the study methodologies are not quite there yet. We can't put them out full scale. But what we do have right now is enough information and data to target and fix the worst of what we know. We know we know where that pipe is. So we can get it out of the ground and put new pipes in this 5-year CIP cycle. So water tank rehabilitation, this one is pretty. They're pretty easy to see. This one kind of blended in with the blue sky, and now it blends in with the clouds. So that's an actual tank, the Windy Hills tank that was done in 2015, 2016. This tank was coated in a lead-based paint. So we take extra precaution to verify that that's done properly. We do have 5 other tanks with a lead-based coating, and it is important to note that the lead-based coating is on the outside, not on the inside. So we don't have to worry about it being on the inside. So the state is beginning to draft legislation on the methods of removal of this lead paint. And we're exploring options to actually just remove the tank altogether rather than dry blast it and replace it with another tank. These tanks are a little more difficult, so we did have to paint this one, but we have some tanks that are closer to the ground and may be a little easier to do. If we do go the dry blasting route, though, we will have our specifications drafted to the state's regulations and make sure that they're in place before we do any work on the tank. So moving on to sewer, and still within question 3, because with the state revolving loan fund option, this project includes several steps in the rehabilitation process for our sanitary sewer system. As Tom mentioned, these are more easily rehabilitated by essentially putting a pipe inside the pipe. I'll get to it in just a second, but so the first step is to identify the critical lines and perform inspections using closed circuit television. The CCTV inspections are then reviewed, and the defects in the pipes are prioritized in a report that we use to group projects that are identified for similar rehabilitation methods. Again, as Tom mentioned, most of our sewer lines are actually gravity lines, and that's what makes them as deep as they are. So you start out at about 5 feet, and then you continue to go by gravity till you get to about 20 feet deep, and then there's a pump that pumps it back to 5, and then you start the process over again. Luckily, we have a little bit of topography and 2 main trunk lines here in the city, so we only have 3 pump stations. There are cities with 20, 30, 40, 50 pump stations just because of the topography that they have to deal with. We have done approximately we've identified $4 million worth of repairs after inspecting about 15% of the system. So the way that these are done, they actually just take the top off of the manhole, and it's almost like a sock that's impregnated with a resin, and then they feed that into the pipe, and then they blow it up with either steam, hot water, or even a UV cure, and it essentially cures inside the pipe, and then you have a new pipe inside that pipe, and it'll extend the life of the original pipe by approximately 50 to 75 years. And as Tom said, we do have a few of these projects going on in the city right now, and actually next week, starting Sunday night, we will have the CCTV crews out doing the CCTV inspections on Delaware Avenue ahead of the planned reconstruction of Delaware Avenue, probably in 2020 to 2021. So we're a few years ahead of that, because if we have any repairs to make, we'll make those in 2019, 2020, and be ready for DelDOT to come through and pave the street. So this is question 4, our general fund and parking fund projects. These are general fund projects that are included in for proposed debt financing. Many of these projects are necessary for the operation of our city, yet they always seem to get a lower priority than the utilities and other projects. Our ADA transition plan, which is Americans with Disabilities Act, has been in place since about 2008, and it utilizes city funds as well as federal block grant funds in order to upgrade the handicap accessibility and transportation routes to comply with the current ADA standards. We have replaced nearly 1,400 of the 1,800 existing ramps, as well as upgraded many of the city-owned facilities, like out here in front of City Hall. So essentially, these are, for the most part, these are the handicap ramps that you see on the side of the road with the little red domes, the little square with the domes on them. We typically do about 40 a year, so we're looking at about another 10 years. And I like to say that since it's the federal government regulations, that eventually, when we get these all done, they'll change the regulation and we'll have to start all over again. So we're hopeful that doesn't happen, but we'll certainly be ready for it. Hard surface improvements for parks amenities. That is to upgrade and maintain some of the infrastructure and amenities in our well-used park system. Where possible, we piggyback these projects along with our annual street contract in order to secure better pricing. So many of you may not know, but we have three parks, or 3 trails within the city of Newark that are in the top 5, if not the top 3 used trails within the state. I'm not going to give you exact numbers, but the Hall Trail, the Pomeroy Trail, and now the Reservoir Trail all see very, very good usage, even in the winter months. Once we put these in, they don't get the wear that a regular street would get, but they certainly get wear from bikes and people, and they're not built to the specifications of a street, so they do deteriorate over time and need to be replaced. So our field operations complex is where we store all of our equipment and material used for maintaining the where we keep the material used for maintaining the streets, the water lines, parks, sewers, and other things that we've discussed previously. We do lack storage space at this for our expensive equipment, which sits out in the weather. Phase 1 of this project was to build a new salt shed, which enabled us to have enough salt on hand for an entire winter. We used to have to fight at the barges of the Port of Wilmington with other municipalities and DelDOT to make sure that we had enough salt to get through the winter. Now we fill it up before any threat of storm, and we're generally able to make it through to the next sunny day. So phase 2 of this project will demolish a warehouse which is already partially collapsed, so the job's mostly done for us. And then we'll replace that with a more functional bay system. With that, I'll turn the presentation over to Dave Del Grande, and he will discuss why we're looking to finance these projects using debt and the options that we have as a municipality contemplating these types of projects. So any questions afterward, let me know. With that, I'll turn it over to Dave. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Tim. Good evening, everybody. I'm Dave Del Grande. I just want to thank you all for laughing at our dad jokes, because it's the 10th time I've heard Tim and Tom's jokes, and I'm getting tired of laughing at the same one. So I still laugh at the lead one, even though with the paint being on the outside of the tanks, it's a good thing. So what got us here? Why are we here tonight? And the city's utility rates have been structured solely on consumption. So as we said earlier, if you're away from your house for a long period of time, you don't use any water, don't use your sewer, you get a bill for zero. Even though we have infrastructure in the ground, you get a bill, so forth and so on. Our rates, our sales are based solely on consumption, and it's also based upon the weather. So as you know, it's rained from Christmas through last week. We haven't sold a lot of water, and we kind of go with the ebbs and flows, literally, of Mother Nature. So when that happens, what we assume we're going to see for revenue assumptions that we build into our annual budgets, we don't meet those numbers, we have a problem. And because we pay cash for everything that we do here, when we end up being $3 million short over the last 3 years collectively between water and sewer, which would have gone into a lot of these projects had we had that money, or it ended up stalling some other projects that we had or slowed them down. So what this is going to do is it's going to buy us some time over the next few years to get our utilities in line with our rates and consumption and get those issues figured out, making it all revenue neutral, but giving us some more assurances that we're going to collect what we sell. And also, the state is offering some ridiculously crazy rates on these state revolving loan programs that just get better and better as we did more and more research with it. My previous life, I did some time working with the county for about 17 years, and I worked with Denrec a bit on these programs, and Denrec was heavily recruiting the county and any other municipality that would listen to please, please, please take our money. Ultimately, these are competitively based loans, and the interest rates and the programs are fantastic. So with our debt financing, it accomplishes two main goals. One, that it fairly allocates the cost of these projects over their useful lives, and that allows everyone to pay their fair share of the cost of the project over a period that these assets are being used. And the other is the long-term debt has a minimal impact on our annual budget, and that's what keeps our annual revenue requirements down, and that translates directly into the rates that we charge and the fees that we charge to our customers. So if we're able to borrow a larger amount of money, pay back over a longer period of time, that's a smaller piece that we're paying, just similar like a mortgage you have at your home, paying a couple $100,000 today versus $1,000 a month would be a little more affordable. So we have three options, and ultimately, as we stated about, is the state revolving loan. There's bond financing, which is our backup plan, and our backup to the backup plan is the bank loan. So touching more on the state revolving loan program, it's all of our water-related projects are eligible for this, so water, sewer, and stormwater. Ultimately, what makes these rates so competitive is that the federal government supports this program. They give about $40 million annually to the state of Delaware in order for the Delaware to run these programs, which are competitively based. So we're filling out applications for each project that we have. We're sending it to Denrec, and it goes in front of a board, and the board is thumbs up or thumbs down on everybody's request. They have so much money to give out, and what they're doing is giving out low interest loans, locking in Rodney, which we've already done at 2% over a 20-year period at $9 million, and everything else is in the 2 to 3% range on the other projects. So the SRL also is interest only during the construction period. So as Rodney's under construction for the 2-year period, we're just paying the interest only payments, and then when we have the official ribbon cutting ceremony, and then that's when our true amortization schedules kick in. So I'll show you in a second why that's a good thing for us. Our second option is going with the bond market. That's what the city's done in the past with the reservoir. I'm sure you're familiar with that. With bond financing, you're looking at higher closing costs and fees than you are through the state revolving loan program. Going through the bond market, you're dealing with Fitch ratings and Moody's investor services to reaffirm our bond ratings to ensure that we're worthy of paying back what we're asking to borrow, and it's an expensive and costly process. So when we went back to the bond market in 2011, we spent about $110,000 to go through that process. If we were to borrow $3 million, or if we were to borrow $10 million, it's $110,000. The price doesn't really change because you're still going through steps A through Z with that. And lastly, but not least by any means, is the old bank loan. It's just like any old standard bank loan you would get at home, and the closing costs are low. And sometimes if you're borrowing smaller amounts of money, the higher interest rate that you may pay on a bank loan is generally offset by the low fees that you pay. So sometimes the total cost of a bank loan outweighs the benefits of going to the bond market. So this is our current debt scenario. And this is a kind of a key feature which I'll go into on the next couple slides. Today we're spending about $2.7 million a year on paying back our current debt. We owe, as of 12/31 of 17, we had about $15 million outstanding on our loans. Some of that is through the smart meters that we have out there that you have for water and electric, through the reservoir itself. We owe, of the $15 million, about 6.5 left is the reservoir. We have our city-owned assets have fiber running through it. That's a tiny little red bar at the bottom, and we have a parking soft, which is the top two yellow bars at the top. But ultimately, the biggest piece is our smart meters and the reservoir, which is the green and blue. Our goal is, using debt, is to keep our debt numbers roughly around $2.7 million a year going out, and take advantage of these little gaps that we have in the out years to get these larger projects underway. So ultimately, that the debt that we pay on an annual basis is about 3 to 4% of the city's total revenue that we bring in every year. So we can expect to have that obligation going out, and that this opportunity that we're going to have will be used to fund these critical projects that need to keep our infrastructure working the way they should. So to summarize with the state revolving loan projects, these are the projects that are strictly going to DENREC for approval. The first one is Rodney, of course, which is both questions 1 and 2 combined here. Our capital plan, we've asked for a total of $8.1 million, but on our application we have $9 million as approval. And the reason for that is just to give us a little bit of cushion, because they offered us a low interest loan at 2%. And one bonus of this 2% loan is the state has approved us already, which is something that they don't do ever. And the fact that they approved a project like this for this amount of money is tremendous, because the state found this project to be of utmost importance on their priority list. Even though we were even considered for a 0 interest loan, we were in competition for that, but we came in second. So second place isn't bad with a 2% loan. We're happy with that. The other ones, the other sewer and water projects that Tim had mentioned, they're all listed here. And the reasons why we have them scheduled out the way we do is to meet our debt service requirements in the out years. So we're not putting any stress on any one particular year or not. Makes it easier. Oops. Okay, so this is the remaining projects that are all related to the general fund. And ultimately, I'm not going to go through all these again, but it all adds up to $3 million over the 5-year period. And if everything were to be approved on a state revolving loan programs, this would be the remaining projects that we would be looking to fund through some type of loan. And ultimately, just so as a reminder, what you're all voting for through the referendum is for the city to have authorization to borrow up to $27.6 million. You're not approving the individual projects or those types of things. You're just giving our council the authority, the okay, the blessing for us to go and secure these loans after the review of these projects. So all these projects are in our current budget. They have been approved, but we will be going back to council after the referendum for a second run, just so they're aware and they give their final blessing, as a couple things may change. So the proposed referendum helps us allocate the financial obligation across the next 20 plus years to share these costs equitably and fairly. So as I mentioned, our current debt of 2.7 that you see here, that's the green box on the left side of the chart. So the green is our existing debt, and we'd be layering on loan obligations with each question. So Rodney 1 and 2, question 4 is the general fund items, then the water and sewer pieces are down here. So I've gotten really good at Jenga. I have 3 kids, and they've taught me how to get pieces to fit in the holes. This is the little spike in Rodney, and what you're seeing is that's when the projects are coming to completion, and then we start making the full payments on the debt from the projects. So due to the timing of our projects that we see, we still feel, these are all estimates, just I'm putting the asterisks on here. We're looking to keep these numbers right around the 3 million range. Not saying it might go over a little bit or under, but ultimately, if we stay in the $3 million sweet zone for our debt year over year, that falls within our current budget parameters that we have. So this is what we've been doing already as a city. We've been lining up all of our projects as we go year over year, coming to council with our budget and saying, this is what we got to do. And then after we've gotten beaten up a little bit over the years and having some good discussions, a lot of these projects don't even make it to the budget because we know they're not going to make it to the end result anyway. So they get shelved. But hypothetically speaking, if we were to go forward with all these projects and ultimately if the referendum were to fail, council still can move forward with these projects. We just would have to come up with other ways to fund that. And if the referendum fails, that means bond and debt financing is off the table, and we have to come up with cash. So the way to come up with cash, that much cash, you can kind of guess what might happen if that were the case. We'd be changing our fees and the rates that we charge to come up with $27 million over 4 years. To me, that's not a fair thing to do to ask our current residents and businesses. Since we have Rodney that's going to be living all the way out to 2080, I made that date up, but ultimately sharing that cost over a 20-year period or over a debt period, people who are living here in year 2030 and year 2035 will be paying their share of Rodney, not just you all who are buying it over today, tomorrow, and next week. So this is the way we've been doing things on a smaller scale, and then using the bond market on the large pieces like the reservoir and so forth. But ultimately, we've gotten to the point now with all the post-World War II homes coming up for developments, coming up for rehabilitation for sewer and water and those types of things in our large projects. We really can't push these projects off much longer. And with the state revolving loan opportunities, it's a great plus for us. So cash today, here we are right now with our debt, and then we would have to add cash onto the next 4 years for all these other projects, Rodney being the orange one. Okay, so we're getting to where the rubber meets the road here. What's this going to cost me? And I'm not a car salesman. I'm not a salesman by any means. I'm just the guy with the numbers here. This is what the percentages would look like hypothetically, just based on these projects that we're talking in the referendum. If we were to cash finance, which is everybody paying for it now, this chart, this is what the top box, the impact would be on your wallets. No change right now, but next year, all your fees that you pay to the county, taxes, sewer, water, stormwater, electric, you would see a 12.7% increase in what you're paying today versus to next year. Then in 2020 would follow by another 2% increase. 21 and 22 would drop back down to the rates that they are in 18, just funding these projects that we have lined up. Go with debt financing, we're right under less than what the cost of living is today. Cost of living for April was 1.4% compared to last year. We're looking at a 1% increase in 19, 0.4 in 20, 0.5 and 0.8 in 2022, mainly because I'm not looking for $27 million in 3 years. I'm only looking for enough to cover the loan payments over this period. So this 0.8 would just stay on going in the out years until the debt's paid off. All right, what about dollars? So today, the average Newark resident pays $276 per month, and that's if you break your tax bill into 12 and then go with your monthly water, sewer, stormwater, and electric. Using cash, I'd be asking you for another $35 a month next year. And then the following year in 2020, $620. But probably when I got to this point, you'd be like, remember that finance director? What was his name? That guy with the $35. But then when the new finance director was here, you guys would be pretty happy that your bills went down here and here. Going with the debt piece, your $276, you'd pay another $2.70 a month. In 19, another buck, another $1.46, another $2.33. So this $270, $1 of that is Rodney. And just to remind you all, the stormwater fee is paid by everybody in the city. No one is exempt from paying a stormwater bill. Even the city of Newark pays a stormwater fee. 40% of the stormwater utility is paid for by one Pacific nonprofit group in the city. So the cost of Rodney, 40% is being paid for by folks other than the residents. So it's very helpful to us here for that. Okay. So one of the best parts about the state revolving loan program is all the interest that everyone pays for these programs go back into a kitty, and then that interest becomes a revolving fund that then gets divvied up and given back out to those in the program via grants and more low interest loans. So hypothetically, we could receive more back in grants from the state than the interest that we pay on these loans on an annual basis, which even makes these 2% and 3% loans more like a negative 1% negative. If they were a private company, they wouldn't be in business. So, but this is all good for us, and it's great for Newark, because if we don't apply for these programs, they're going to somebody else. And they're going to go to another agency in the state, and they're going to be holding their hands and pretty proud of the fact that they got a grant and we missed out. But ultimately, these grants and these programs, they go towards things that the city's already doing or we have plans to do. They go towards our SCADA systems. They go towards our asset management, which is ultimately, as Tom mentioned earlier, the fact that we used to write things on the wall as part of asset management. Now we have maps to tell us where things are, and how many did we turn a wheel 23 times. Now asset management tells us what we've done, what's due, how we've done it, when things are going to fail. The state wants us to know what all those things are. So to help us with that, they're giving us money to help us get there, things that we would have spent money on anyway. So it helps us help ourselves, and then gets some of our interest back. Yeah, there's drinking water grants, surface water grants. As you can see, they're $50,000 a year. I'm sorry, $50,000 per grant, up to $100,000 annual. All these could exceed some of the interest that we're paying. But perhaps my favorite one is the low-income financial assistance program. The city could receive up to $400,000 a year, $200 for water, $200 for sewer, to help our low-income residents pay their bills. And as I mentioned earlier, when we're looking into revising our rate structure, there could be some impact on some residents. Some will be better, some would be worse. But having a program like this to help us get there would result in a minimal impact, or if not any impact, to residents who are low income. So since I've been here with the city, for the last couple of years, we've been working very heavily with those who are low income and have problems paying their bills. And this is just another tool in our pocket that helps us get there. Because ultimately, if the bills don't get paid, the city has to pass that cost on to someone else. And ultimately, this helps everybody in the long run. So at this point, I'll pass it back to Mr. Coleman.
All right, thank you, Dave. So what's the process from here? So we are fairly near the end of it. So we started back in, well, actually, so we did finalize the referendum questions on the 14th. That's how we got the 4 questions that we have today, May 14th. So we're currently in the advertising and outreach window, so even though we did start that before the 14th. The next critical date for us is the June 19th referendum, and then depending on the results of this referendum, so either way, the results are certified by the Board of Elections on the 21st, and then our City Council likely on July 9th. So if we have a positive result starting July 9th, we're moving forward with Rodney. We're going to finalize the design plans, our bid package specifications, and get that out to bid so we can get a final plan to council this year and start remediation of the asbestos and other environmental concerns over the winter when it's less expensive and on and so forth. That's when we start on all the other projects that are approved, developing the design, working on the specifications, et cetera. If we do not have a positive result or a partially positive result, it will end up with a mix. The ones that do get the okay to move forward, we'll move forward with. The other ones, we'll work with our council to reprioritize our capital plan, restructure when we're going to do things, and discuss whether or not we're going to raise new revenue to pay for them sooner. So in summary, again, here are the 4 questions. Trying to drive these home. Question 1 is Rodney Stormwater Facility, option 1. Question 2 is all the park amenities and educational amenities. Question 3 is our sewer and water projects. And question 4 is all our general fund and parking fund projects. So we're putting all this information on the city's website. I alluded to this web address earlier. This is the only one you need to know. You can find everything here, newarkde.gov/vote. We also set up an email address. We set it up as part of this process, asknewark@newark.de.us, but we will keep this email address live. This is going to be our, if you have a question for Newark email address, into the future you can ask anything about anything Newark related. It'll get to the right person and we'll get you an answer. We've also developed a frequently asked questions document. It's up on this vote page. So after we get done Q&A here and you leave and you go home and you realize you had a question and it's burning, you can't sleep because it's so excited about it, you can go to that page, you can check the facts, see if the answer's there. If not, you can call us tomorrow. So I'd like to thank everyone for coming out. We had a great turnout. I know there were plenty of other things you could have done tonight besides sit here. We appreciate you came and listened to our spiel. So at this